Welcome back to the Fit Coach podcast, the show where we help men drop 5 to 20 kilo of body fat, build a lean, strong physique, and optimize their health, hormones, and habits so they can lead life with more energy, more confidence, and less stress. Now, in today's episode, it's going to be a little bit different. I've been meaning to record this for a while, but to be honest, I kept putting it off. Not because I didn't want to do it, but because it's hard to compress your whole life story, all the highs, the lows, left turns, into a single episode. But I also know how powerful it is when you actually understand the why behind someone's mission. So, today I'm going to take you through my story. Not every little detail, we'd probably be here all week, but the raw, real moments that shaped who I am today. My journey in fitness, my journey in business, and most importantly, my journey in life. From being a shy kid who used to sneak to the gym at night, to helping hundreds of men worldwide transform not just their bodies, but their mindset and lifestyle too. So let's take it right back to where it all began. I was born in a town called Osnabrück in Germany, and my family were in the military. I'd went to my first school called Bruggen, and it was on this campus called JHQ, which I believe is closed now. Anyways, I'd always had a passion for sport from a young age. I'd play out in the garden, and my parents really pushed the idea of physical activity. And I have this fond memory of playing badminton with my two sisters in the garden. Anyways, I believe from the age of 2, I started playing football with a club called Rheindahlen. And it was a bit of a social because looking back, especially from a very young age, I actually struggled to make friends, being super introverted and quiet. But not just at a young age, but throughout my teens. And one of my good friends, Dan Jarvis, his dad had run the club for the best part of 10 years. And I believe that Dan plays professional football now for Stoke City. And later, we will talk about my trials with professional teams like Queen's Park Rangers and Kansas City FC, and how this all links together from a young age. So I played with Rheindahlen for about 5 to 6 years. And when I was ready, my parents had actually sent me to boarding school at the age of 10. And being fully transparent, I was on a scholarship for sport there, as there's no way my family could afford the fees. But on top of that scholarship, they also gave us a military bursary. So I was in a very fortunate position to, some might call it, go to private school, which is very posh. And that's where my passion for fitness and sport really kicked off. Because at school, they really pushed academics or sports. You kind of fitted into one category or the other based on who pushed you and, well, what boarding house you were in. It was almost like Hogwarts. And you had the sorting hat, and they'd put you in Gryffindor, which was called Wiseman's. That was the house I was in. Or Hufflepuff, the other boarding house, which was called Mobley's, the sporting house. Now, Wiseman's was an international house with boys from all across the world, like China, Russia, Poland, Belarus, Nigeria. And the house was known for its academic performance, and unfortunately not sporting performance. But I made it my mission to really drive sport inside of that house and to unite, I guess, my friends and the students together so that we weren't just talked about as an academic house, but an all-rounder house. From the age of 13, I aspired to play for the first team. So typically the first team is 17 to 18-year-olds in football, rugby, and athletics. And I did that. I got my name on honours boards and I earned my purple caps. But I still struggled to fit inside of the boarding house because whilst I would be fixated on going to the gym, engaging in sport, the boys were more focused on gaming after they completed their studies rather than looking at personal development. And I get it, as kids, we don't necessarily know where life is going to take us. And don't get me wrong, I did try to fit in and play video games. I wasn't very good. But that's where it led on to sport scholar sessions. Because whilst those boys were gaming in the house, I actually received private personal training sessions from the age of 13 from a chap called Tom Jordan. And that's where things really started to get serious, because Tom had previously played semi-professional football. And at that age, I was looking for a role model. Every Tuesday, we'd hit the gym. We'd lift some weights. Bear in mind I was 13, so nothing compared to the weights that I'm lifting today. And we'd finish with some cardio. And this usually meant running up and down Clifton Suspension Bridge Hill. And for those of you that are listening to this podcast, whether it's my peer group that I grew up with, probably knowing that I was super introverted and quiet, you will know how tough running up Clifton Suspension Bridge Hill is. Now, when I turned 15, that's where puberty really hit me, because I remember coming back from summer holidays and my school clothes didn't actually fit me anymore. Now, my matron, for context, a matron is someone that either lives in the house or does jobs around the house, laughed as I walked down the stairs, having arrived back at the house, with a blazer that was oversized, which had now fit very snug, and trousers which looked like compression shorts. I'd grown a significant amount. I believe that before summer I was around 50 kilos in body weight, and I actually gained 10 kilos over the summer, so I was 60 kilos now, and I'd probably gained an inch in height, but I was still very small, because even though I'd hit puberty and seen a little growth, I was still always the shortest and the smallest in my peer group, whether it was in rugby or football. But I still made it my mission to tackle the biggest guy on the pitch, or to improve my athleticism, whether it was to jump higher or to run faster. I felt like I had imposter syndrome because I was always trying to make a point to my coaches. Instead of the other boys who were bulked up, well, it seemed like they didn't really need to do much. The biggest guy on the pitch, especially at that age, is going to get picked. Now, like any teenager, I'd search online how to get abs. And that really started from the age of 16, when I started going to the gym more frequently. Now, at school, we'd have something called prep. And that's where we would write up our homework or we would engage in studies from around 7:30 p.m. until 9 p.m. at night. And between the hours of 9 to 10 p.m., I'd actually make it my mission to head over to the gym. And we only had a curfew for around 45 minutes because it took around 15 minutes to get to the gym. So I would sprint over. It would take me a couple of minutes. I'd then train, and then I'd sprint back, making sure I was back at 10 o'clock. Otherwise, I get a telling off from my housemaster, which is essentially a chap who's in charge of all the students within the household. Now, whilst I was at the gym, the other boys had played video games. And I think that's where the obsession really started to stand out in team sports, because now that I was going to the gym more frequently and now that I was eating considerably more, I started to grow. But I was still told that I wasn't eating enough. And I remember at 17 years old, I was probably still around 60 kilos. And we had a PE lesson. And that same coach who said I was small on the rugby pitch had actually taken us through a training session. And we were there to dumbbell press. I can't remember if it was a dumbbell incline press or a dumbbell flat press. But all I knew is that we were dumbbell pressing. This is something I'd been practicing between the hours of 9 and 10 for most evenings. Because, again, at that age, I didn't really follow a split. I just went into the gym and, hey, I wanted the trained chest to look better and almost improve my physique and my aesthetics following things on YouTube and also following sort of the cult behind Jeff Side and Ziz. So anyways, we jump into that PE lesson and it was my turn to jump onto the bench. And I went and grabbed the heaviest dumbbells in that gym, and I believe it was 50 kilos, right, at 17 years old. And I remember flicking these up and pressing them for around 3 repetitions. And I put them back down on the ground, and this coach looked at me, and I looked back at him, and he just nodded. He didn't say anything, he just nodded, considering the other boys within my PE group, again, bear in mind, these are the boys that I play rugby alongside who are a lot bigger and a lot heavier, couldn't press these dumbbells. So again, it was my mission to stand out, to make sure that I was heard, so that people would start to respect me. And I'm not sure whether that's because I had social anxiety or I was super introverted. It was more so I didn't want to be left behind. Now, I wouldn't say I was bullied at school, but I would say that I didn't fit in because I'd always drive to play sport or focus on fitness rather than the norm, which was to play video games or watch TV or study. And that's because of the boarding house I was in, Wiseman, or as we've called it, Gryffindor. Mobley's, on the other hand, or as we've called it, Hufflepuff. Should have used Slytherin as a better example, but they were the sporting house, and that's where the majority of those boys who were heavier, taller, the boys that I'd played rugby with and football with, well, they were in that house. It was almost like I was the ugly duckling or the black sheep. Now, at 18, we had to decide whether we were going to university, and honestly, I didn't think I'd get the grades because at the start of that academic year, I was told by my teachers I wasn't smart enough for biology or science because originally I wanted to do physiotherapy. Anyways, I'd heard about this thing called a gap year, and I wanted to play professional footy. Having played since the age of 2 and at the age of 13, I actually played for the England equivalent, which is called ISFA. So when leaving school, I did just that. But before we move on to that, I was actually presented with a silver shield called the Gordon Hazel Trophy, which is given to 1 out of 1,000 students for their hard work, dedication, and generosity. Now, why am I telling you that? Because I think often teenagers, men, they sort of roll over when someone tells them that they can't do something. And I made it my mission throughout my entire school years to be heard and to be listened rather than be looked at for my weight or my height. And it was super rare to get this sort of silver shield, but it was a stepping stone in the right direction. And I feel I should mention this because getting trials on my gap year for football was tough. My parents had just divorced, and we won't go into too much detail about that, but it impacted me big time. And I remember wanting to get away at weekends, and I'd spend any money I had on trains or buses to London or Bristol to go to Harry's football trials. And it was around 70 to 80 pounds for the football trial, and then travel on top, which I believe was around 40 to 50 pounds to get from, we were situated in a place called Taunton, to London at the time. But now in 2025, train fares have absolutely skyrocketed. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's now 150 to 200 pounds for a train fare. Now, I didn't have a car. I'd often walk 3 miles to the train station or the bus station, and sometimes I'd take my bike. And it makes me laugh because this bike, I had a flat tire at the front, and I'd often find myself carrying it along the country lanes with cars literally beeping at me because the inner tube kept getting damaged. So sometimes in my backpack, I would carry this pump, and every couple of strides, probably say it was around 2 to 3 minutes, 20 to maybe 30 strides. Is that 2 to 3 minutes? Maybe not. I then have to stop and pump this bike up. And leaving school was tough because I actually saw everyone partying at university, having a great time with everything in place, and it was like I had nothing. No job. I wanted to play professional football and literally spent every single penny that I had. Now, the first trial I'd played, it was in London, and I probably got 5 minutes of pitch time. It was very hit and miss because there were around 100 boys, and I didn't say anything about the money that I paid, well, because I was still super introverted, so I didn't get picked. I then went back home, booked my second trial, I think it was a week later, and again I headed up to London, so again, the amount of money invested into travelling, and I received feedback from one of the coaches. I hadn't been selected again. I needed to improve my left foot. So again, I went away and I spent a good few months in this little football cage near the house, wet or dry, kicking my football. And I remember I wanted to film this like the F2 freestylers, so I packed a GoPro and I filmed it all. And I want to describe this cage. It was open air. It was bars all the way around. So when you did kick the football, the ball would actually bounce in different directions, whether it was left or whether it was right. It didn't directly come back to you. So I guess that forced me to change my technique and actually control that ball almost as if it was under the pressure. Anyways, I was saving up for my next trial. And again, it was in London on one of the Tottenham Hotspur football training grounds. Now, from what I understood, there were big stouts from United, yes, United, and others that would come to Harry's football trials and they'd watch the boys play. That day, it was an absolute nightmare travelling because I left at around 7 a.m. Again, bear in mind, I didn't take my bike this time. I'd be walking along these country lanes. And I got there for around 2:55 p.m. and kickoff was 3 p.m. I'd taken one train, which was meant to be direct, but then there were rail strikes. So I then had to get 2 Ubers. And you're probably wondering, why didn't you just get one? Well, the first Uber actually took me to the wrong location. So again, me being 18 years old, stranded, I then had to book another Uber. And then I eventually arrived at the grounds. I got out of the car and I remember the coach shouting me over saying, "Quick, there's 5 minutes." And I was actually scrolling on my mobile phone to see how much money I had left in my account. And it was £7. And I was stressing at the time, how am I going to get back? How am I going to book my travel to get from this ground back to the train station? Because I then would have had to take a different route since the rail strikes on that particular route. And this chap was called Joe McCoglin, I believe. He said, "Get your kit on and get out there." He was an ex-Chelsea manager, and he mentioned that there was an American team that was scouting for the MLS, the Major League Soccer. Now, I got on this pitch and I was super hungry at the time. I had super low blood glucose. I hadn't eaten. I was stressed from traveling. I put my boots on. And at the end of the game, Joe came up to me and he said I'd been scouted by a few teams. One of them was offering a scholarship and a contract, and two were offering further development trials. Now, the scholarship was with an American club called Kansas City FC, and the other two trials were with Queen's Park Rangers and Cheltenham Town FC. Now, after doing some calculations, I actually couldn't afford to go to America to play for Kansas City in the MLS. Why? Well, my parents had divorced, so there was no backing in that sense. And also, I didn't have a job. I'd spent all of my money on these football trials. Even with the scholarship that they were giving to attend university, I had to politely decline. And Joe was actually the one who was pushing that. So I emailed him and I said, look, I'm not going to be able to go. I then accepted to go for further development trials with Queen's Park Rangers. And I'm not sure when this was. I think it was around 2, maybe even 3 months after my initial trial. And during that trial match, let me set you the scene. I'm running down the left-hand side, so I was playing left wing at the time. Funny enough, having practiced with my left foot for a good chunk of time. And one of the defenders actually came across, and as I stepped in, he'd actually swiped my legs. And at the time, I didn't think it was very dangerous. You know, I fell to the ground, adrenaline was running through my blood, and I went to get up, and I just felt this wobble, almost like jelly. Anyways, the coach is running over, and they blow to kind of pause the game. And it turns out I actually ruptured my ACL and torn my meniscus fully. So I went to hospital. I was off my feet for about 6 months. But I guess the one thing that I didn't pick up on was, even though I'd ruptured my ACL and torn my meniscus fully, it was actually my foot that had become infected. So not only did he swipe my legs, but the studs had actually gone into the top of my foot. And I've got a photo somewhere on Instagram. And this swelling and this infection was all the way up my calf. And I kid you not, you could literally push from the calf, and where sort of this hole was with very loose skin, there would be pus or infection, this yellow greeny liquid coming out of my foot. And I knew then that football was over. I could barely walk. I was off my feet for the best part of a year. And I started to panic because for the time that I was trying to push professional football, I could have been at university for the first year, and I could have been starting my second year and finding my feet and getting everything in place. In the end, I decided to jump online and look at university throughout the summer. And I really wanted to go to med school because I wanted to do physiotherapy. I didn't have the grades for that. But the combination of strength training and science inspired me to undertake a biomedical science, health, exercise, and nutrition degree. I didn't have the grades to get into first year. But what I did see is that one of the universities in Wales were offering a foundation year. So you would complete this foundation year, and I think you needed to get around 40% to be accepted onto the first year. And I did just that, and I got a first class honours in every single year that I attended that university. And I spent the next 5 years studying and playing futsal with the university team. And you're probably wondering, how did I heal my knee? Well, like anyone does, you go through rehab, you book chiropractors, you book physiotherapists, and it was more so just gaining that traction and that movement. Now, interestingly, when I'd actually damaged my knee, my meniscus, my ACL, and got my foot infected, I don't know what the doctors said word for word, and I'm not gonna sort of say the wrong thing that they didn't say. They pretty much said I wouldn't have any use of my knee for a long time. So I knew that football was over, but I still had aspirations to be able to train and to heal that knee. Now, I wasn't a party goer. I was still super introverted at 19, and I really struggled to fit in with my flat in first year, who were super extroverted, always drinking, always on the sesh. But my focus was on my studies and the gym. Now, once I'd healed my knee fully, I found a new love for powerlifting. And between the age of 19 and 20, I was around 83 kilos, and I squatted 240 kilos, benched 160 kilos, and deadlifted 270 kilos. So I was pretty strong for my age and my weight. Why am I telling you this? Because often people will tell you things that you don't want to hear, such as you're not going to have full use of your knee anymore, or that football is over. But again, much like when I was a kid, it was my mission to sort of prove them wrong. Whether it was my rugby coach, my football coach, my athletics coach, I now proved to the doctors that I could use my knee. I actually competed once and I hated it. Why? It just felt like there was no goal. You lift weight and that's it. Whereas with football, you had multiple trials to get into. You were compared to hundreds of thousands of men to be selected for a professional contract. And after that, I actually quit powerlifting and I went into power building alongside studying with my degree. And I guess that's where my lifting career really took off, but also business. Because between the age of 20 and 21, I was training in a gym called JD Gyms in Wales and Cardiff. My weight was around 87 kilos at the time, and I'd squatted 220 kilos for 12 repetitions, and I remember the gym going completely silent. The music had actually cut out when I racked the bar. And this was during my first ever cut, where you could argue I got Jeff Side or Ziz shredded. Now, if you don't know who they are, get to know, because a few days later, I decided to post this on Instagram. And I actually got recognized by a small platform called Rising Lifters. This account had a few hundred followers at the time. And they asked if I would share my lifts and that they could post it on their social media. And I thought I was a celebrity, and I thought, why not? Today, they have over 128,000 followers. So where am I going with this? Well, without them, I wouldn't have had a few people reach out to me via Instagram asking if I had any training plans, how to get stronger, how to squat 4 plates, let alone squat 5 plates for 12 repetitions. In all honesty, I hadn't. I was so focused on my medical degree and my own training. But they were offering to pay me for a one-off program. I spent the next day coming up with a logo called Team JAC. And I sold the plan for around £8. 8 freaking pounds. I thought I was balling because, again, at university, it costs £9,000. And for your accommodation, it costs around £9,000. So you can do the math for the best part of 5 years. Anyways, I used this money to pay off some of my bills. Word had spreaded that there was some shredded 20-year-old who trained in a commercial gym selling these programs, and it went around the university. Yeah, it was £8, but again, it paid for my university accommodation, paid for some of my uni fees. I didn't have a job. Why? I don't know. Should I have had one? Potentially. But I was so focused on this next goal of mine, which was to grow Team JAC by selling one-off programs. At 21, COVID had hit, and we were forced to train at home. So I had to think quickly on my feet, and I bought some 52-kilo dumbbells, a techno gym, which I saw someone was selling on Marketplace for like £200. And I spent the next 8 months bulking, or shall we say, getting out of shape. But looking back, lockdown made me use these heavy dumbbells every single day. Pressing, pulling, even trying to balance them against my sofa in my uni house. It was super difficult. I either used them or I didn't grow. Whereas for the majority of men during lockdown, they didn't train. So I guess I had two choices: to make excuses or to come up with solutions. Now, if you're listening to this, I want you to try and grab a pair of 52 kilo dumbbells, and I want you to put them on the floor. And then I want you to put one of them on your quad, and then the second one on your quad. And you're going to go into a floor press. I can guarantee that the first dumbbell that you pick up will be fine because you're using two hands. But then when you try and squeeze the second dumbbell onto your quad and then go back into a floor press, you will struggle. But again, I made it my mission to be able to train with what I had. And I remember balancing, leaning back on this sofa, pressing these 52 kilo dumbbells overhead. Now you could argue the range of motion was super poor, but again, it was what I had. And I actually remember breaking the sofa because if you think, it's 104 kilos plus the weight that I was at the time against this sofa, which had no stability. Now, my weight had gone from a shredded 80 kilos to around 100 kilos. I purposely dirty bulked to see how strong I would get. I remember one session I picked up these 52 kilo dumbbells and I pressed them for 30 repetitions at peak bulk. And I'm pretty sure I've got that video somewhere inside of my university house. I thought I was invincible. After lockdown, gyms started to open and I headed to Pure Gym because that was one of the first that opened up. And that's why I realized I was super strong. I was pausing 240 kilo squats for sets of 8, thinking all of these split squats that I've done and bulking have been put to good use. If I was to describe what my training plan looked like, it was a floor press, it was an incline press, I would do a dumbbell RDL and I'd do a split squat, and then for rows, I would do a single arm dumbbell row. And that was it. Inside that Pure Gym, I benched 200 kilos Larson. My previous max was around 160 kilos. So I wanted to take things further. I actually set up an online coaching business towards the end of the year called Supply Academy. It looked like a DNA helix, and it was focused around science-based lifting. I thought it was a good idea at the time, but to be honest, no one was interested in science. They were interested in getting results. And I'd spend hours creating one piece of content for it to get 4 likes. And I'd go into so much detail which spoke science, but not human. I remember signing maybe one client in probably 6 months having launched Supply Academy because I had no understanding of marketing or sales. I thought people would just buy it if I launched something like Santa Shred, which I saw every other coach doing, or they saw my training, these big numbers that I were hitting. I was ready to give up. I actually gave up social media altogether after university. I worked in a lab for a while doing PCR, polymerase chain reactions, sorting out everyone's COVID samples. And I worked for a company called Boots, which for those of you in the UK, it's a chemist. Yep, it was okay. 12 plus hours a day, long days from around 5 a.m. And I started to get burnt out. But this was only the beginning, as I'd actually met the love of my life during that time. And we were talking about why I didn't coach anymore. In all honesty, I probably felt like an imposter. But here's where it gets interesting. After labs, I then worked as a diabetes type 1 and type 2 specialist, helping roughly over 2,000 patients drop 5 to 20 kilo of body fat without restrictive dieting and lowering their HbA1c blood glucose levels. Now that was something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed lecturing and I enjoyed teaching and education. But I knew deep down something was missing because although these people were great, they weren't the type of people I wanted to lecture. Anyways, a few months down the line, working as a lecturer, I went away to London for the first time with my partner. And we got to this hotel, and I'd been chatting about coaching on the way up there and how I'm seeing everyone crush it on Instagram and why it didn't work out for me. Supply had failed, and I had a vision of setting up another company, but I wasn't sure what to call it yet. But then it came. As soon as we got off the coach, I ran to the hotel, sat at the desk, and I thought about Superman for some reason. And I started to draw the letters FC, as in football club. I had a vision that the FC would change on a video into a key where we help men unlock their potential. Now, you should have actually seen the first t-shirt. I'll pop it up on screen somewhere, but honestly, it was awful. It did look like football club, but I was proud. It was the start of something. Anyways, I was trying to come up with a name, and FC was what I originally started with. But then came Fit Coach. Now, my favorite colors are red, hence the background, black, and white. But black and white I'd used already with supply, so I decided to use red and black. I'd sent off this logo to be edited. It cost probably £300, and again, at the time, having only just graduated and trying to find my feet, that was a lot. But I was excited, and the thought of getting a logo back that looked more professional, that's going to help me sign more clients. Boy, oh boy, I was wrong. Still no clients. Anyways, fast forward a month later, I'd been seeing mentors all over Instagram pop up as ads. Now, I didn't have the capital to invest in one at the time. I'd been renting in Wales, hadn't really settled into a proper job since leaving med school with all of my debts, and I probably procrastinated on this for about 6 months until it finally hit in the summer. I received an email saying, "Jack, do you want to grow your online coaching business?" I saw this bloke from the gym that I was training at grow his coaching business and make income I dreamed of, but didn't believe it to be true. I thought it was fake. So I panicked. I actually replied to this email and said yes, even though I had limiting beliefs that it was fake, it was all made up. So I kid you not, I actually went for a walk for about 2 hours around the city centre. My head was pounding. All I was thinking of was, how am I going to pay for this? Within minutes, I'd received an email back saying, "Are you happy to jump on a call in a few hours?" So I booked this call with this person who'd been blasting ads all over my social media. And I had really bad anxiety. I was questioning, how will I pay for rent? How will I pay for food? How will I pay for my car? How will I pay for bills? Just to pay for this mentorship to grow Fit Coach from zero. Now, still at the time, I was someone that really didn't have a backbone to say no to anything. So I hopped on this call with a mentor, and he'd asked all the questions about coaching. I'm not going to bore you with it, but we got to the end of the call, and I'll be real. He pitched me £10,000 to work with him. I gulped. I went super quiet. All that was running through my head was this extreme debt that I had from med school, no real financial security behind me, and now it's almost like I'm looking to take a gamble, red or black. The catch was I could split it across the year per month. Now, I just said yes. I didn't even think, and I just sent the money. Well, it was probably the best decision of my life, because from that moment on, I had to make it work. I probably had less than £100 left in my bank account for food, for rent. I was even stupid enough to quit my diabetes lecturing job and go all in on coaching. And then you're probably wondering, well, if you had £100, that's silly, right? Yeah. I'd spent around 8+ hours at work a day. Then any free time I'd be coaching or I'd be training. I needed more time to grow this thing. And I actually remember my partner had gone away to Germany for a week, and I spent probably 12+ hours a day in one spot, not really eating, putting off my training to work out how to grow this thing. And my advice to anyone thinking about this is balance is super important. So when you go in on something, just make sure that you look after your health, because it was reaching the stage where I got burnt out. But a few weeks had gone by and I got my very first clients. I was able to pay for bills. I was making money from my laptop. I could work when I want. I could wake up when I want. I could train when I want. Now, all these coaches inside this mentorship had apps, automations. They were ahead of me. People working for them. And all I had, was me. I didn't even know how to coach these people apart from using Google Sheets. And that was all that mattered, because whilst I was still trying to work out the social media side of things, I posted these transformations for my very first clients that gained traction, and it started to sign up more and more clients through the learning marketing tactics and also getting better at sales tools. Now, this will make you laugh. My first ever sales tool lasted 10 minutes. And for those coaches that are listening to this, the person on the other end thought I was trying to sell my body for pictures. Yeah. So I needed to make sure my marketing was spot on. Now, over the years, I've pushed clients to do photo shoots, learned how to become confident and an extrovert, as well as change people's lives. I realized that all men need to optimize their health, hormones, and performance, because dieting and dropping body fat is one thing, but when a client's health is jeopardized just for that coach's before and after transformation, this is something I disagree with. I've now been in the coaching industry since 2022, and the fitness industry has changed massively. There are newbie coaches coming onto the scene with copy and paste programs, as well as content ruining people's lives. What you're allowed to eat, what you're not allowed to eat. I've had content stolen and clients poached. And I strongly feel that all coaches, educators, and people promoting health, whether you have a medical background or not, we need to work together to help those people in need. If they want to drop body fat, build muscle, just focus on helping them. Do not focus on just getting money, which I've come to realize that some coaches are signing these clients up, then air them, and then taking their money. So it brings me on to what life is like and business since I took that leap of faith. I run something called the High Performance Health Program, where you work with me one-to-one. You don't get passed to another coach. We take you through our 5-phase metabolic system, which ultimately helps men over 30 change their lives through dropping body fat, building muscle, optimizing their health, their hormones, and their performance. The 5 phases are broken down into Clean the Palate, which focuses on habits, values, and obstacles. The Dig, phase 2, which focuses on fat loss. Phase 3 is Focus, which is a maintenance. And typically we get our clients' bloods done in this phase, or if they decide to get them done in phase 1, Clean the Palate, so we can build their training and nutrition from their blood markers. Phase 4, Investment, which focuses on muscle building and athlete specialization. And then finally, phase 5, Mastery, where we bring everything together, we identify weak areas. So it's a pretty lengthy course or program. It does take around 12 months to complete. And I actually designed this off the back of investing literally every penny I have into more mentorships. So since the first one, I've been in 4 anatomy and physiology courses, biomechanics courses on top of those mentorships. And you're probably wondering, but don't you have a medical degree? Shouldn't you know all these things? And the answer is I do. I achieved a first class honours in med school, having been told from a young age I wasn't smart enough for science. I published a research paper in the Exercise Medicine Journal, which is called the Provisional Designation of Interleukin-6 Receptor as a novel marker gene for exercise tolerance. And you can check that out online. But for everyone out there, we should always be wanting to wake up and learn more, regardless of our experience or our background, to adapt, to grow, to be better humans. And that's my goal on the High Performance Health Program, to help change lives through coaching. Now, in terms of life, I've got some pretty big goals. I'm mid-20s, I've started to get grey hair. I wonder if my knees will eventually give out. But until then, I'm forced to sit in a chair all day until my last breath. Yearly, I'll be doing a Spartan. I love the physical activity. I love the endurance of that. I train 4 to 5 times per week using weights, upper lower splits or push-pull leg. I think a lot of people, when they come to my page, associate my physique with the bodybuilder. But I am far from it. We don't work with bodybuilders. I don't like the idea of eating out of a Tupperware. I don't like the idea of eating the same thing on repeat, like chicken and rice. We look at nutritious foods to improve all aspects of health, including gut health. For me, I'm just wanting to build a lean, athletic physique. And I think that's where most men, when they get older, that's what they want. To reduce their aches and pains, to increase their energy, to find time to be able to work out. Does it have everything to do with their lifestyle? What they eat, how much they sleep, and ultimately how often they exercise? Yes. And that's exactly what we focus on. So, to sign this podcast off, no matter what age you are, whether you're 18 or 89, you have the ability to change your life by taking action. For me at school, I was told I wasn't smart enough, and I turned into a science-based educator. I was told by doctors after football that I may not be able to use my knee full function again, and I went to squat 302 kilos, 250 times 10, 230 kilos times 17 in my back garden during lockdown. And I thought I wouldn't be able to run a coaching business, but now I've changed over 500 men's lives, all by taking action and believing in myself. And I say this to my clients, and I'll say it to those who are listening. If you work hard, you remain consistent, no matter what, you will get a result. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to follow for more episodes like this. If you're a man wanting to drop 5 to 20 kilo of body fat, build a lean, athletic body, optimize your health and your habits, DM me lean on Instagram @JackFitCoach, and I'll send you over the info on how we can work together. Or if you want a free copy of my fat loss formula to help kickstart your journey and drop 5 to 20 kilo of body fat, just comment formula below this episode and I'll send it across. That's it from me today. If you enjoyed this, share it with a friend, leave a review, or message me on Instagram. I always appreciate hearing your thoughts. Until next time, stay lean, stay strong, and keep pushing forward.